Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Reena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started. We're here today talking about managing staff in a post-pandemic market. So talk with me. Tell me, how do you feel like it's been from a staffing standpoint after the pandemic? Have you had any staffing issues?
Honestly, I think in our case, I feel like I still have the same fear I've always had in how do you retain employees. But it definitely is now far more on my mind in the sense of, I think previously it was always difficult to find somebody you liked and who met all the, can I afford them? What do they bring to the table? Do they get along with the team? All of that. Those were always concerns anyway. I think the difference now is, at least the last couple of times I've posted for a position in the last, say, 6 months, previous to the pandemic, I would get, 50 to 70 or 80 applications. And of course, you weed out probably at minimum 50% of those. Yeah. And then you had, say, 18 or 20 that you were like, maybe. And then you message out a dozen of those and see who bites. And of that, you get 8 replies back. And of that, 6 people show up. So, it was definitely a process of whittling down. And what I've noticed since the pandemic, I'll put out a post and I might get 8.
Wow.
And of the 8, I might get 3 or 4 to reply back.
Yeah.
And of the 3 or 4 that reply back, I might like 2 of them with their responses. So it's definitely a much smaller pool of people.
I mean, that's massive when you think about it, going from 80 to 8.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely highlighted. We're hearing about it in every other industry. Every restaurant you're going to has a sign that says, now hiring, et cetera. So, we've always in dental, I don't think it's the pandemic that created the problem of work crew pool, whichever way you want to put it. But it's definitely highlighted now that I don't want to say it as beggars or choosers. We're not beggars for sure. We definitely want quality at some point, but it's almost like I'm reassessing.
Yeah.
What is my definition of good? What is my definition of quality?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's gotten trickier and I'm having to think outside the box a little bit more about what I'm okay with and what I'm not. And then shuffling the other pieces around in the office to see how do we accommodate for, this new situation. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I can even think back to, 2 years ago, it was like work history was super important to me, where I would look through a resume and it was, if they jumped around or if there was gaps in history, I was really zoned in on that now. And it's not that that's not important anymore. It's just how important is that? Am I willing to eliminate one of the 8 because they have a spotty work history?
Exactly. Like before, anything I didn't like, you had a typo on this page. Nope. Because I've got 20 others that don't have a typo, that have a similar work history, similar experience that they're saying. And I don't have that anymore. So now I've got to go back and say, well, I still don't like that, but...
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, and I feel like, too, it's one of those challenges that if you are missing an employee and you need to replace an employee, you are looking at, as much as we hate to say it, is lowering your standards. That the standards that we used to have are no longer applicable, because if we kept those same standards, we wouldn't hire somebody.
Right. And so I guess, but for me, rather than calling it lowering my standards, because I really, then I fight myself with that going, well, why was it important? Then it's not important now. It's just, okay, I've got a different set of standards. Yeah. And then for me, it's always, well, this domino piece is now tipping and it's not isolated. It's going to affect the whole flow and system, and what else can I compensate for? So for example, this person who's very adept at admin type stuff, but she does admin and then she does HR and then she does insurance verification. Okay, well, clearly the other person that was going to balance out those tasks we're trying to replace, now I've got a pool of 8 and none of them were typo free.
Yeah.
So that's telling me none of them are going to be great admin people, but you know what? They might be good HR people, or the task lists are having to change to kind of retrofit who I'm finding almost. So it's definitely having to think outside the box so that I'm not lowering my standard.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
it's almost like, if we think back to it, if in the office you had a round hole that you were trying to fill, you had 80 resumes that you could look through and ultimately find the round hole.
Right.
And it's now thinking, okay, well, it may not fit the exact position I have, but now I'm having to kind of rethink that position, and how can I shuffle people around to make this person ultimately fit into the position that I have for them.
Right. Exactly. Like, it's a round hole. Could I make it into an oval? Like, what could I do to like carve out here and shift that there? That, okay, an oval is a good compromise now. Absolutely. So it's, I do get bitter at times going, well, I feel like what I have to keep giving. I've got to, quote, lower my standard. Okay, we're not going to call it lowering standards. I've got to shift my
expectations.
And you shift here and you do that there, and let's shuffle around here and there. And darned if this person doesn't want, I want this, I want that, I want blah, 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 salary, benefits, this. And I'm like, but you don't know anything.
Yeah.
So I almost feel like I'm kind of held by the balls, if you will, if I can say that.
Yeah.
And I don't like that, and I never want to be in that position. So I feel like, how do I not feel like I'm being pinched and grabbed? So I think that for me is where I find myself now, is going, okay, well, I don't like this feeling. But what are my choices? I'm going to shut down.
Right.
So
or scale back. I mean, it's like those are the options: are shutting down, scaling back, completely running a different type of practice. So I know I've had clients that have had to consider like dropping insurance plans now because they don't have the staff and they can't find the staff to run the same level of a practice. So it's putting people in positions of trying to figure out what's changing in my expectations or what's changing in my practice.
Absolutely.
And that's hard.
I feel like that you've nailed it. And that's, in a way it's unfortunate, but on the other hand, it's like, it's change. You have to be willing to move and mold and change. And so this is just yet another
change
facet of that. Yeah.
And it's one of those changes we can either be bitter about it or we can tackle it and figure out, what are we going to do with it? And how do we move forward and continue to have a successful practice in all of this? So that kind of leads me to my next thought, which is, okay, so we've got the staffing side of it that we're really struggling with, but then how does that shift us to manage the staff that we have any differently? So I know, especially on your team in particular, we've got really great employees that we would be sad to lose. Pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, it doesn't matter. We would have been sad to lose them. But now it's almost like we've got a staff, and there's some really great ones, and there's some good ones, and there's some pretty good ones. And we would be sad to lose any of those right now. So how does that kind of change the way that you've managed or changed your expectations? Have you been doing anything differently with your staff?
I think just really being very mindful again of, have I been doing anything different? That I don't know, because I think, again, for me personally, it was always, they could leave at any minute. That's always been my fear and worry of somebody leaving, and me being blindsided and not picking up on the red flags that they were ready to leave. So I think for me, it's always been, I always function with that win-win mentality. Yeah. If I'm expecting you to come in for 10 hours a day and I'm going to pay you $12 an hour and I don't want to give you vacation time, and who would stay? I'm winning, you're losing. And conversely, if you're asking for $19 an hour, but I don't want to work on Mondays and I want to leave by 3 on Thursdays, no, I'm not going to do that either. So I think definitely a philosophy of win-win. Where is it this fair enough that, yes, you are coming to work, and what can I give you that would, I'll put it this way. One of the biggest things that I've seen probably over the last year or so, it's pretty consistent. Yeah. Pretty consistent about every applicant who I have interacted with, and they're all saying, I want a place where I matter, where my voice is heard. Yeah. And so I think that was very striking to me, because I want to say 5 years ago, that's not what I heard. It was all about salary and pay and all of that. And so I don't know if it's just the generation that's changing and the pool, or especially post-pandemic, it's very much like people are back to quality of life. Yes. And that's fair. Yeah. That's same for me and for you and for, my dental colleagues, that's for all of us. We want a good quality of life. So to not think that our staff wants the same thing. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all people. So what is a good quality of life? Right. And so I've got colleagues too that your day starts at 7 and you see patients till 5. Well, that's a really tough day for a mother. So how do I make that palatable to a staff?
Right.
If I'm going to demand that, what am I giving in return?
Right.
So do we have a 3-day weekend pretty often? Do we have more PTO? Do we have, I don't know, but those are all the things that I think where a lot of people kind of miss that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I want. And that's not the applicant pool we have anymore.
Right.
And I think that was starting pre-pandemic, but the pandemic has totally driven that home, I think.
It's totally escalated it.
And you do see so many people working from home. And obviously we can't do that in our field. And so to try to find, if I'm going to ask you for this, then what am I giving you back? And I think before, 5-10 years ago, there wasn't much we had to give back.
Right.
And now the shoe is on the other foot.
Yeah. It's more of to your point, it's got to be a win-win strategy. And I don't know that we've always had to think that way before. And I think now, it was becoming that way before the pandemic, but I think now post-pandemic, you think about people that have been off work, they were able to still make some income in that off work situation. And now they're coming back into the work field and they do have different expectations. Life isn't the way that it used to be. It's changed completely, whether that's, actual logistics that have changed for them or just the expectation of, wow, I enjoyed that time with my family. You know what? I could make it on less income because we did it for a year while I was unemployed. I can make less money as long as I have that work-life balance that I didn't realize until the pandemic that I was missing out on. So figuring out what that is for your staff members and going, okay, how can I satisfy that where I'm getting what I need to run a successful business, but they're also getting what they desire and what they want. And I know in your team in particular, we had a conversation with your team, gosh, I guess it was maybe 8 or 9 months ago, where we were asking them what their plans were, what their goals were. And we were really surprised in that meeting. I know I was, to hear, because I'd worked with your staff for so long, and to hear these sweet little desires that they had that we felt like we knew them. And then just asking, what are your goals? And hearing, one say, I want to own a house. I'm a single mom. And to be able to own a house in a few years. And it was like, oh my gosh, I would have never known, because of the situation that she's in, where she's got a comfortable place to live. I would have never known that was a goal for her. Or one saying, I really want to have my retirement built up by, this particular age. And so just kind of diving into that conversation, I feel like you've always been in tune to your staff needs, but it's almost like we took this as an opportunity to go, okay, we want to make sure you're achieving your goals in life, just like you, the doctor, are achieving with the practice. And so I think even taking that to the next level and figuring out with your team, what do they want? Maybe we've never really asked that question before, or maybe we've asked it or we're making assumptions and we haven't really kind of dove into the deep end on that side of things.
I like that you say assumption, because to me, the assumption has always been pay.
Yeah.
I just always assumed that that's what they want. And it was a very transactional situation. And I think that's where, a lot of people pause and go, well, that's, as the doctor, this is what I need. This is my office. Take it or leave it. If you can't, but we're not in a take it or leave it. I mean, you're going to get left.
Yeah.
And then what are you going to do? And if you can work through that, if you're at a stage in your practice where you can cut out 2 columns and cut out all insurance and cut down your staff, then go for it. But if you're still, going, oh no, I've got to work for another 15 years, could there be an upswing? And for some reason, somebody love dental assisting and that be a trend, but we're not there right now.
No.
And so I think that's really what's hitting me right now going, I mean, it's really been where I almost wondered if I had done something wrong. Like, did I not hit submit to where I only had like 8 applications? It was so bizarre. So bizarre, because I would always be ready to be inundated and carve out time to dig through these applications. And I mean, I'm lucky if I get 8 hits right now. Right. So I think especially being in Dallas and a metroplex, I think in some smaller towns, it's obviously probably going to be different, but in bigger cities, there's so much competition.
Yeah.
And at least what I'm hearing now is not what I assumed. My assumption was money. And of course, everybody wants money, but I think the consistent theme again has been my quality of life. And I want to be in a home where I'm appreciated. That seems to be, and it is hard for us. Like, it is hard to be a dental assistant or a front desk in a dental office where there are so many demands on you.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate all of that. But at the same time, as an industry, it's always been the dentist is the one who is educated and is producing. And, the expectation is I'm going to take this home and you may or may not be, how far your education goes. And therefore you are agreeing to these terms.
Yeah.
And that is no longer
It's not the model
reality
anymore. And I think part of that, stemmed from this millennial market that has kind of come about. They're our workforce now, really. Not that there's only millennials, but it's primarily millennials, at least in this area, in the dental field. And so they do have much more of a purpose-driven mentality. They want quality of life, or they want to do something that matters. They really have a purpose behind what they do. And so I think you're right. I mean, even 5 years ago, we could have said money. And even if money wasn't the driving force for a person, we could kind of throw some money at them and it would work. And I feel like that's becoming not as quick of a fix anymore. I think we're having to kind of dive in a little bit deeper. And especially now, I think post-pandemic, this has kind of forced that to kind of come to the surface. And I think there are going to be plenty of practices that struggle to keep good staff if they don't really dive into this category.
And it's a tough spot to be in, because I'm always again going, okay, so I've got to tap dance on my head to make sure you don't leave. And I can't, the ones that, we always try in our practice to say, okay, well, I've hired this person to help you with your job, right? So if I've got somebody more in a leadership position or a managerial position type thing, and this person's being hired to make your job easier, and I can see that this person is helping in, 2 of 5 tasks, and then trying to get your managers and your leaders or your people that have been there longer to understand that, they're expecting perfection in all 5 and really 7 areas. And, so for me, the other part of that challenge is I can't let my management team know that the market is this way, because I don't want to be held by the balls by my managers. You know what I mean? So it's, I feel like it's like this quicksand, and I'm trying to stay above. And like I said, I feel like I'm tap dancing on my head right and left, and, trying to remind everybody to show compassion and patience, and then really trying to figure out where do we draw our line? Because again, I don't want, I guess, the fear I have is now we've got this new person in that, been a challenge to hire. And we've found that, of the 2 that showed up, it's the one that we like the best. So we've offered the job, they've accepted. But then now trying to manage the expectations of the rest of the team. Yeah. And, that's another area where I'm struggling, going, well, would this have been acceptable? So I think for me, I've still drawn the line of lateness is a big thing in our office. So if you can't show up on time, we are going to cut you. Yeah. And so I've not been able to compromise on that. Yeah. Now, where I am compromising a little bit more is kind of what we were saying before of, if I really was hoping you could take on these 4 tasks, maybe I'm only giving you 2. Yeah. And then I'm trying to play shuffle and see if something that somebody else was doing, could it be like a 2-point half task that I could at least give this person and then trade out tasks? Yeah. And I think some of the management team struggles with that a little bit, because they feel like, well, you're making special accommodations for this one. Yeah,
it looks like it's unfair. Yeah, it looks like it's unfair.
But I kind of am, and I'm trying to be more strategic about it. And now, I mean, you've heard me say, I go to the team and say, well, do you not want this person on the team anymore? Right. Because ultimately that's going to mean you are going to have to pick up XYZ. Are you okay doing that? Is this person that much of a burden on you? And in some cases, many cases we've had, I'd rather do the work myself. Yeah. Great. Ask the person. And then we've had other times where it's been like, well, maybe we put her this and I'll switch this task and so can pick up this and we'll maneuver that. So, again, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we weren't really having to do that. And now we are.
Yeah. And again, that's part of that pivoting that I feel like, again, we almost have to do now. And maybe that won't last forever. Maybe that's just this period of time, and maybe this will last for a few years. And but I'm even hesitant to say that, because I feel like with that millennial workforce, I feel like this is going to be almost, this is a blessing, that it's kind of forced us to look at our staffing a little bit differently than we've had to do in the past. And I think it'll continue for a while. I think it's getting the team. I think you and I understand that. You used the word strategy earlier, and I'm like, that's exactly what it is. It's strategy. It's almost like a game of chess. We've got our players, and we are figuring out how to manipulate and move that board so that we can ultimately maximize every player on our team. The problem is, when you're on the board and you are the team, it's really hard to understand and appreciate the moves that are being made and
behind the scenes, the strategy.
Yes. And the change in expectations, because it does. It looks like a lower expectation than it was before. It's not. It's just a strategic change that we're having to make, because again, we're picking from one person of the 8, and we're trying to make that fit in a way that we haven't had to do before. We could find what we were looking for before, and now we can't. And so I think getting the team to accept that mentality is the hardest part of this, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're saying too about that millennial mindset and the different, I mean, you're right. I feel like we all were struggling with that a couple of years, for the past couple of years. And it's like, this generation seems to, again, not be so swayed with the money, and they want the this and they want the that, like, whether it's time off or whatever it is. And the pandemic just accelerated that. I mean, it brought it to a head. And so I don't think there's me personally, I know you're saying this could change. I don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
Yeah.
I think that we were already on this trajectory and this just speeded it up.
Yeah.
So again, what do I do?
Yeah.
Throw in the towel and say I'm done. I mean, there are so many days I've wanted to do that. But then kind of going back and saying, well, okay, be reasonable here. How do I not get held where I feel like I'm being held hostage in my own environment?
Right.
How do I come out ahead and strategize this?
Yeah.
And I feel like I have this conversation a lot with colleagues of mine too, going, y'all, we've done a lot harder before.
Yeah.
Like, we wouldn't be where we are in offices where we are if we hadn't met challenges and figured it out. And so we're very capable of figuring it out. We may not want to figure it out. We may just want our way, but we're still going to get our way. It's just going to require a little bit more tweaking here and there.
Exactly. And I think it'll be worth it. It's worth the effort because it's going to, first of all, keep our practice successful, but also it's just forcing us to practice and manage staff a little bit differently. And change is not always a bad thing. Change can often be a good thing. And like I said, I feel like the pandemic kind of forcing this new mindset on how to manage staff is probably, we were headed in that direction anyway. And I think there would have been plenty of practice owners that just kind of drug their feet on those changes and ended up with a majority millennial staff that just wasn't satisfied with the way they were managing. And so if anything, if this pushes this forward and forces us to kind of be a little bit more creative in the process, it could be a true blessing.
Absolutely. I had a colleague that reached out to me, and apparently an assistant was wanting a raise, and the assistant was a pretty good assistant. And the dentist was kind of saying, my friend was kind of saying, well, no, I don't know that I want to give a raise. We're post-pandemic. We're still trying to recover ourselves.
For sure.
And so I definitely saw where she was coming from. And I don't feel like I was in the position to give her any real advice because I didn't know the rest of her team and her players. But I feel like, too, I kind of wanted to ask her and talk about more about, is that a realistic expectation? Because you could let that one go. Are you overstaffed? In that case, let her go.
Yeah.
Right. But if she's one of the best ones in your office, whoa, put on the brakes a minute here and think this through. Step back, because it almost to me was like, are you on the chessboard right now? Because you need to take a couple of steps back and look at the big picture and not get caught up in this one situation. Yeah. So anyway, point being, I don't think she's had to do that very often.
Yeah. And now, for the first time
in a long time, here she is. And she's just like, no, I'm not going to give you a raise. Get out of here. Yeah. Which, again, may be perfectly appropriate in this situation. If it's a bad employee, not showing up on time, being the troublemaker in the office.
Right.
But that's not the feel I got. And so I really was encouraging her to really take a look and kind of see, because as far as I know, she hasn't put out a post anytime recently. And, I did a couple of months ago, and it was just, again, it was mind-boggling. It was eye-opening. Yeah. I'm like, what? Did I only pay for a week of posting this? Like, what? Did something change on me? Because I thought this was out there for a month. And so I kind of encouraged her to look at that.
Same.
Yeah. And so again, if that's the standard, and this person's not meeting her standard, but I don't think she has considered that regardless of. So again, I don't want her held by her balls and having to give a raise to somebody she doesn't think deserves a raise. On the other hand, are you ready for the other shoe to drop? And if you're ready to try on that shoe, great. Yeah. But I don't think she's aware of
what she's up against with the market.
Yeah.
And how valuable retaining staff is right now.
Yeah.
Really more so than it's probably ever been before. I think, retention of staff is one of those things. It's valuable because if we can make those tweaks and those changes, and we can really retain a staff member, the investment that we have to make in a new staff member, as you know, is grand. And so, in the past, we've been able to think a little bit more loosely about, do we really want to retain the staff member? But right now, we're in one of these weird spots where it's like, no, if you're going to guess one way or another, retaining the staff member is probably the better choice right now.
Absolutely.
So then it's thinking about, what do we do, to retain that staff member, and can we change expectations like we've talked about, or can we, with your friend, can we change pay? Is that really something that we can afford to do? And should we just go ahead and do that?
Well, and to me, is that going to be more cost effective in the long run than hiring a new person that XYZ, like that alone and the number of mistakes that person's going to make while they're trying to figure out the nuances of your office and etc. So I think the pay, that's kind of to me the least of the worries. Like if it's just a buck here or there, for the love of God, pay it and move on.
Yeah.
Again, assuming that all other things good. She's embezzling, she's stealing, she's a bad apple, she shows up late, etc. That's not what we're talking about here, but short of...
Yeah.
And it sounded like, to me at least, this employee was a good employee.
Yeah.
Just pay her and move on.
Exactly.
And knowing my friend, I think part of her too was like, okay, well now this one's coming to me asking for a raise. What's to say in 6 months she's not going to come back and ask for another raise?
Right.
And then now she's going to go tell her friends in the office.
Right.
And now they're all going to come to me for a raise. So am I opening this Pandora's box? So I can absolutely appreciate where she's coming with that. And so I think you taught me this, Bethany. It's like, okay, well, don't just give the raise. It's like, okay, well, here are the parameters of what you need to do to get your raise.
Yeah.
And, in this employee's case, make it 2 weeks. Make it something short and stupid, If you show up to on time every day and there's, not a consent form that hasn't
been missed or a clinical note or
and your ledgers are all accurate. If I see that for a straight 2 week period, then you get your raise. So that way it's like, then they're not just telling their friends in the office that, oh, I just asked for a raise and I got it. No. And then that way, when you do have somebody who really doesn't deserve the raise, well, then maybe they're on a 3-month period of, so
and more expectations.
Right.
There.
And you've got to be, and that's what we're talking about. You got to be creative and think outside the box, because I know traditionally speaking, that was always one of mine and my colleagues' fear was that somebody was just going to come and then it would just open this door of I want. And then again, I'd be stuck. Yes. Prisoner in my own office. And so thinking creatively around this way, I think we're having to do a lot more of that.
Yeah. What do you feel like with your team are some of the perks that you've brought in over the years that you feel like has possibly helped to retain some of your good people, or maybe has even just made you feel like, okay, I'm doing something more than just pay for these people?
I definitely think a 401k match is something that I feel like I like that. As if I was an associate at somebody else's office, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So again, going back to, we're all people, we all want time with our families, and we all want vacations, and we all want these things, whether I'm a doctor or you're the janitor, like either way, we all want those same things. And so I think the 401k with a match has been great. I think we do a lot of team building event.
Yeah.
And I think the girls like that because they feel seen.
Yeah.
And, for example, the state fair, we're in Texas, the state fair's in Dallas, for basically $400 or $500.
Yeah.
They love that event. We go on a Wednesday that in a pediatric office in September. We're not doing anything on Wednesday. Honestly, I'm saving money by not having to pay that overhead, with having people in the office. And we take a Wednesday that's going to be slow and low production, and Wednesday, because that's, you get in for $3 if you bring a can, right? So we bring the cans, they show up. And then I really just go buy a sheet of tickets and everybody just gets as many tickets as they want.
Yeah.
Really, at the end of the day, it probably cost me $400.
Yeah.
Maybe $500.
Yeah.
They are on cloud 9.
Yeah.
Because they got to get out of the office.
Yeah.
They got to try, because we'll get a dozen different foods that nobody can, those things are expensive on their own. And who could eat a whole fried, steak, blah, blah, whatever it is, cheesecake, butter, etc. Concoction. And so, but this way, we got a dozen of them and everybody got to try a bite. So now they've got a story to tell and Instagram pictures. And my boss took me to this. $400, that's a drop in the bucket. So worth it. Now, I get it. Like, it's a day out of the office.
Yeah.
So it could be more expensive than that. But again, trying to think creatively then. So are we going to be, are we going to have another day that typically would have been closed, but now we're open? Or are we adding a column of hygiene on a busier time, et cetera? So it's like strategically planning ahead for that. So I think the team building's definitely the staff likes. I think I've always tried to make sure we have good hours, because same for me, I want to get home to my family in a decent amount of time.
Yeah.
And so I think the people that work for me are ones that really value that time with their families at home, or don't have the childcare or whatever they've got.
Yeah.
And that's something that they know is going to be harder to find in another office.
Yeah.
So,
and I would say to that point, that's one of those things that we have to be careful of making an assumption on. I'm thinking of one person in particular, on your team that does have that desire for work-life balance, has no kids. So this is not just,
that's true.
We're creating a good schedule for those, moms that want to get home to their kids. Part of the millennial mindset is this ability to take vacations, to be off work,
to work out.
Yep.
to do what they enjoy. And so creating a schedule that allows for that, not just for the moms on our teams, but for everybody on the team, that they all have their own goals that they're trying to do outside of work hours. So I think that work-life balance, we've got to be careful not to assume that that's only for the moms that want that.
That's very true. That's very true. And then having opportunities for the people that do want to pick up more hours, having those opportunities and having set tasks that, it's like, if you wanted to pick up more hours at this point, could I? And so in the back of my mind, I've always got that going too. It's like if somebody, they're saving up for their kids' back to school shoes and bags. Okay, well then I do have these things available if you can come in and do these. So having a little bit of flexibility, I guess I would say, in the schedule is definitely something that at least my team enjoys. If I were to say there's something that I don't have that would, I think, put us over the top in recruiting, is health insurance.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think the reason we haven't done that, we've had some issues, and of course it always changes, and I haven't asked more recently, but I think my biggest hesitation on that is it seems like it's an overwhelming headache. And maybe it is and maybe it's not, but I've always perceived it that way. I think the next thing is, can I really afford it? To dive into all of that, it just wears me out to even think about it ahead of time. I think then at one point it was some employees that were going to get a tax credit if I didn't offer insurance, but now that anyway. So I feel like all of those things that are so gray area that I would have to do some work investigating, and I don't want to. I mean, that's one other thing that I think if an office can, and I feel like the trend was a long time ago, 10, 15 years ago, health insurance was kind of a given. And now it's less and less and less. So I really feel like if I offered it, I could probably draw in the cream of the crop. But I just feel like, I don't know.
It's complex.
It's complex. And then there's several employees that get it through their spouse or that XYZ. So then what am I doing to draw those people in? Are they going to expect something different? Well, she gets health insurance dollars. I'm not taking that. So what do I get instead? So,
well, and thankfully I feel like you offer enough additional extras to kind of counterbalance that. So even though that's one of those areas that you can't necessarily tout as having, I feel like with the 401k match, with your vacation, benefits that they're able to earn, bonuses. I know that's one of the things that you've done a really good job on with your team, is just kind of these core bonuses that are built in, but then also practice type bonuses when the practice is doing well, the employee is doing well. And so I feel like you've got a really good, healthy offering of a lot of other things. I think if you're that type of practice owner that's just like, here's your pay, and that's what you've got. Okay, health insurance for an office like that has very little other perks, so to speak, would be very helpful. I feel like I don't think you've ever been in the position where it's like, wow, I can't get this person on my team because I don't have health insurance, because you've got so many other extras built in. So
I would agree.
So retaining employees, I think that's part of kind of this perks that we're talking about. But I think there's also the retaining of employees that may be underperforming. So when we're talking about this conversation, we're like, okay, it's probably better to retain, even if they're only getting 2 out of the 5 things that we wanted them to get. So how do you feel like you've tackled underperforming employee specifically in this post-pandemic market?
I feel like, honestly, I think for me, and maybe you see it from a different way, so please chime in and correct me here. From my viewpoint, I don't think pandemic has necessarily changed that in my mindset anyway. Because again, for me, it was like, this is my standard. And if you're not, if you're the lateness, you show up on time, check. You've got a great personality, check. And now, if I could give you one task to do and you were doing it very well and I was paying you accordingly
to that,
then I'm going to be okay with that. Or maybe 5 years ago, I wouldn't be okay with one employee doing 1 or 2 things well, because we're a small office and I need people to be able to, not everybody has to be an expert at note taking or answering the phone order, but the expectation is everybody should at least be able to have some ability to step in and help when we are shorthanded. So now I feel like that hasn't changed much. And if you still can't, well, we had an employee recently, I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. I mean, pleasant as anything. She was precious. Showed up on time. Actually, she didn't show up on time. That was one other thing.
That was one of the things that pushed it over with her.
Yeah.
I think you and I would not have made the decision to cut. We eventually terminated the relationship with her. But I think if she would have been on time, it would have been a much harder decision for us to make. But she was towing the line.
She was towing the line, and the rest of the employees, I mean, at least in our office, because we are such a, you've got to be party on time office, I mean, that's a pretty big offense. And the team takes it as such. Like, I was here. Where are you?
Yeah.
So that was one that was harder for us to be forgiving on.
Yeah.
And then she was great at really like one task.
Yeah.
Well, she's getting paid as much as, you know, some of the other girls that are picking up far more than just one task.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, at that point, that was very much, you know, let's try to train you in this. Let's sit and talk with Bethany about strategy on how to... We tried doing that, I would say, for a period of what? It was 4 months.
4 months. And we were meeting with her pretty consistently. So I think that's one of the things with an underperforming employee is, again, historically, we may have had the mindset of, let's give her the 90 days. Let's see how she does. If she's not performing, let's move on. I think you and I kind of approach that a little bit differently in that those 90 days, yes, we want to be able to make a decision at 90 days. Is this person going to stay on the team or not? But we're putting a lot into that 90 days. We're not just sitting back and watching the employee fail or swim. We're literally meeting with them, you know, on a weekly basis, sometimes a couple times a week, giving that constant feedback and then troubleshooting. So I think we knew probably a month in with her, okay, she's not picking up quite as quickly as we wanted her to. So let's do this reduced task. And then there were some issues happening with that. Okay, well, let's do it on this schedule. And so I feel like we really tried to problem solve with her repeatedly in that 90-day period. And then even when we got to the 90 days, I think you and I were really hesitant to make the decision to let her go because she was such a pleasant personality on the team. And
that's huge. You know, I think there's definitely, you know, anybody who has an office knows this. And with the hiring part of it, I mean, you're hiring a skill set and it's got to be in the right pay range. And then you've got to have the right personality. And then you've got to get along with the team. And so, you know, at least in our office, like I really do feel like, you know, we want harmony in the office. I personally don't do well if I sense tension in the office. I'm a people pleaser. So for some people that's not your MO, you'll be fine. But for me, you know, I like harmony. And so I put a lot of weight on how do you get along with the team? And she soared with that. So it is harder when, to your point, I think prior to the pandemic, there wasn't this much hemming and hawing and going, should I keep, should I not? It's just like, nah, move on, cut our losses and let's get another one in because I'm going to get another 40 applications in that I can start this over again. So it wasn't that heart, you know, like throwing my heart in there going, what do I have to do here? And so, we did let her go ultimately. And I don't think that was the wrong decision by any means. But I guess the point being that, yes, we've got to be a little bit more proactive with our strategy. Yeah. And like you said, we caught on very quickly that she was not catching on very quickly. Yeah. So at that point, do we just let her go? Or do we see, can we be creative on our end and go, well, what is she excelling at? Yeah. And see if there's another seat on the bus. Yeah. And I guess that's kind of maybe, you know, that analogy might fit in here. Previously, the bus had, 8 seats. Yeah. And there were all these people at the stops trying to get on. Yeah. Yeah. And now it's like there's nobody wanting to get on, and I'm having to maybe put in like, I don't know, benches instead of seats. I don't know how to describe that, but it's just like you don't just have one seat that somebody can fill. Yeah. You might have to be moving people around in the bus a lot. Yeah. You don't get your window seat anymore. You might have to sit in an aisle part of the day. Exactly. And so that does require a lot more strategy and thinking about how to make it work. Yeah. And I think we're just probably a little bit more cautious in kicking somebody off the bus until we know that we've literally tried everything. Yeah. And again, I think to your point earlier, there may be markets that aren't having to think that way. There may still be a ton of people at the bus stop in certain markets, but from the conversations that we've had with a lot of our friends and colleagues, that doesn't seem to be the case yet. And I don't know that even if we get back to that point, once, we've got that bus stop full of people waiting to work at our office, I don't know that even then the strategy should change because it's, again, kind of a silver lining to this whole process. Even if we look at the employee that we're talking about that we ended up letting go, it was valuable to walk through that process with her and know we tried everything. And as hard as it was to let that pleasant personality go, we felt like it was the right decision once we got to that point. There was no regret. There was no thinking back like, oh, could we have done this? And we were able to terminate that relationship with that employee on a very positive note because she knew that we had tried multiple things, that we'd had lots of conversations. There wasn't this bitterness that can sometimes occur in those quick... They didn't like me or they're discriminating against me or there was none of that. I think we all knew that we had tried multiple different strategies to make it a win-win for both of us. Yeah. And we were losing.
Yeah.
Like she knew.
Yeah.
She knew. And so we needed to move on.
Yeah.
And like you said, it ended in a very peaceful
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got to end the session talking about failures that we have made in this particular category. So whether that's retaining good employees or not doing a good job with underperforming employees. Can you think of any examples? And I'm going to be thinking of examples that I can share as well. But can you think of any areas where you feel like you failed in this area?
No. Where I've failed in this area of employee retention.
Yeah. Was there a good one that we ever lost, that we ever let go, that maybe we could have salvaged that? Or is there a situation where we feel like we may have terminated, even pre-pandemic, that we may have terminated too early or too quickly without giving it our full effort? Here. So this, I wouldn't say this technically applies to retaining, but we just had a person that we were trying to bring on in a very specific way. We had a very specific job description, I guess, for her, limited capacity. She only had a few hours to offer. We had kind of, again, based on strategy, we had been like, hey, this is an area we need help. We need a few hours a week for this task to get done. And so we started kind of that wooing process, like, hey, you want to come give us these few hours a week? She was on board. We changed the game. So we had talked about some criteria. It's only this many hours. You can do this from home. It's going to work out great because she would have had to drive quite some distance to get to your office. At the 9th inning, literally right before we started, the management team was concerned that the remote position wouldn't work, that she really needed to be in the office. And so we told her, hey, we actually need you to be in the office, and that ended it. So that's one of those areas. It's not a retention, but you and I were both like, oh my gosh, we had this great employee that was going to be able to come on and support us. But I think one of the mistakes we made in that process is kind of changing the terms at the last minute.
Well, and to your point, again, the whole thing we were just talking about a little bit ago about what is important to that particular employee.
Yeah.
I'm sure she would have taken, a couple of dollars less.
Yeah.
Per hour, because she works for a different office. Her kids are out of the house. Her husband's out of town for work at times. So it's like, I knew she could pick up certain tasks.
Yeah.
And so we kind of customized it for that. Well, when we changed the terms, like you said, at the nth hour, it was like, well, in order for her to work remote, we're going to have to get another computer. We're going to have to do this. We're going to have to do this. No, she really needs to be in the office. And I think for me, in my head, I was like, because I think one of the biggest draws of her helping us was that she could do it from home.
Yes.
And I knew that, and it didn't say anything. I kind of was like, well, I've been hands off in this process. Maybe she will be okay coming in the office. It's only 2 days a month. She will be. Oh, I was wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I was right, and I should have spoken up sooner.
Yeah.
And then she disappeared, and now she doesn't want to help with that anymore. And we had certain strategies set up around that. So you're right. Listening to what it is that they're asking for and seeing if you can meet that. Now, maybe my leadership team was right. Maybe we really can't do that.
Yeah.
But they don't know this employee like I do. It's somebody I've worked with in the past. And so for me, I was like, no, she's worth getting the computer and making this work.
Yeah.
And so my leadership team, not knowing her the way that I know her, was kind of like, well, why does she get to do that? I don't know. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe some jealousy to it, or why does she get to have X, Y, Z? And in my mind, I'm like, you fools. Like she was going to take these tasks off of you, make your life easier. It's not doing anything for me.
Yeah.
It's otherwise I'm going to be on you to get these things done.
Yeah.
So to make your life easier, you should want to make this employee be retained. And they, again, as leadership, they're on the chessboard. Yeah. They're not seeing how they're going to benefit from this.
Yeah.
And for me, that's all I'm seeing is, hey, we finally found somebody that I think is going to make your life easier and meet the standard that I want.
Yeah.
So it was quite unfortunate. I should have said something sooner. And then now, 2 months later, we're back in a situation where I'm like, could we approach her again?
Yeah.
Now I'm being very mindful of my manager again said, well, but remember, it was the computer. I was like, shut it.
Yeah, we will get the computer.
I'll get a computer. Yeah, I'll spend $1,500, and she's gonna save me thousands, like in doing unscheduled treatment calls and doing all this, because she is so proficient in knowing all of those things. She's gonna get treatment scheduled for us.
Yeah,
I have no doubt she could get 5 or 6 IV cases on. That's gonna far over pay for itself. Compensate for the $1,500 I spent on the computer and the phone and whatever else. So with minimal training and all of that. And I think that's one where I kind of went, you're right. I kind of was like, damn it.
Yeah.
I should have either communicated better or been more hands-on and not relied on my team so heavily. They're capable of so much, but in this particular instant, they don't know her the way I know her and what all she could bring to the team. They were seeing her as any other candidate.
I think that's what it boils down to. I mean, the real mistake in it, I think from our point of view, the mistake is we allowed that feedback, which is important. We value, I think that's one of the great things about your team. We value the feedback, especially from our leads on the team. We value that. But at some point, there is a strategy that practice owners have to have when making these decisions. And as much as I would encourage practice owners to definitely get that feedback, that doesn't mean that we always make that decision based on the feedback. Sometimes we have to make the hard decisions that our leadership team or our team in general may not like. But at the end of the day, it absolutely, hindsight's always 20/20. And in this particular case, you and I both knew the value that she would bring to the team. And we knew that they couldn't see it. Your leadership team couldn't see it. But we shouldn't have allowed that. I feel like that was the mistake, is that we allowed the players on the board who can't see everything.
Absolutely.
To call the shot on that. And so we failed in that way.
Absolutely.
But I feel like we were successful in thinking outside the box, because we had a need. We figured out a way to do it. We didn't need a full employee for this particular task. We were willing to really make accommodations. So we were being very strategically creative in that process. It was just kind of at that final step
of execution. And I think you've nailed it. We allowed the people on the board to kind of help guide that. They weren't misguiding us on purpose at all, but they were too much in it. And we were behind, watching what was going on the whole field, and they were unable to appreciate it from that same perspective. So that was a fail. And now, like, going forward, then now that's where we kind of look and say, they weren't wrong from their perspective. They weren't wrong at all. But again, they were on the field. They were only able to see one side of it.
Yep. Well, I'm glad we could think of the one mistake that we've made.
Yeah, that's all. That's all I'll give you.
That's it.
Mistakes. Come on.
All right, that's all we've got for today. Y'all have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.